Hello and welcome to Network Now, a podcast designed to help build business connections and create opportunities. I'm Lee Foster of Revitalize Connecting People, and with me are the delightful, yes, the delightful co-host Julie Taylor and Louisa Stewart of Blue Ninja Business Support. Today we have an 800-pound gorilla in the room. Can you believe that? On the program today. Bill Guertin is a Chief Enthusiasm Officer of the 800-pound Gorilla Inc., a sales training and speaking company based in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. He improves the lives of thousands of people each year with his sales training, facilitation, and keynote presentations to audiences around the world. Bill's training methods are used in over 100, yes, 100 professional sports teams in the US, Canada, and Mexico. And his unique signature keynote on positive mental health is called The 7 Voices in Your Head. Can you please welcome to Network Now today, this afternoon, the one and only Mr. Bill Guertin. Bill, hello, how are you?
I'm terrific, Lee. And to those from Blue Ninja, thank you so much for being here. I'm really pleased to be a guest here at Network Now.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Bill. Thanks very much. Well, we're going to kick things off with questions to start with for you, Bill, if you don't mind, and really delve in a little bit about you. Thank you. Get ready. Where did your networking journey really start for your business?
Well, the business side of it really started at the very start. I was a kind of an entrepreneur kid at an early age. I had a t-shirt business in my bedroom, in my dorm room in college, and really what it took was just showing people what it is that I could do and then asking if they needed that. And I just had a fearless nature about me that allowed me to ask people things that others felt either embarrassed or didn't have the courage to ask others. And that began throughout my career. I was on the air at age 16. I was one of the youngest licensed radio broadcasters in the state of Illinois way back then, back when you had to have a license. And then I moved into the sales side of broadcast and spent 20 years on that side, really honing and refining the networking skills that I was just doing without really knowing why I was doing it. And as I grew into an entrepreneur full time, getting into the speaking and the training business that I've now been over 20 years in that career, I have found that networking is the number one way for someone to say yes to you. Throughout the work that I do in sales training for the ticket sales departments of professional sports teams, what I've found is you could put a wonderful video together, you can have the best one sheet in the world, but unless somebody else says, yes, I've used him or her and they're really good, you really aren't taken very seriously. And so it's the ability you have to network with others, let them know how you've affected others positively, that has brought any of the success that I've enjoyed.
Absolutely superb, Bill. I think there's always challenges, and especially the reputation takes a lifetime to build, but can take a second to really break down.
Indeed.
And it's so important to do so. Over that time of your networking journey, what's been the biggest challenge to you to overcome? And was there a tipping point for your networking? Did you just all fall into place one magical day?
Well, for those who are just starting out in business and you know who you are listening to this, it's kind of this chicken or the egg syndrome. It's I need to get experience to be able to talk like I can talk. And then the others will say, well, yeah, we'd hire you if you had experience. And so there's this, where do you begin? How does that start? And so I was told very early on in my speaking career from a very famous gentleman here in the States, now worldwide, named Mark Victor Hansen. We both had the chance to ride in a limo together many years ago. And he had the best piece of advice I probably had was, for my career at least, speak for free until you no longer have to speak for free. And so I was able to do that and network with quite a few people over the 2 or 3 years I was preparing to be able to jettison my regular world job and become this entrepreneur. And it really became the basis of all of that I've done really came from all of that networking I did and speaking for free for 2 or 3 years before I was given the opportunity to actually speak for these guys. And for those who are sports fans, you may recognize this background. It's all Michael Jordans and such, but this was the very first training class I did for the ticket sales department of the 6-time world champion Chicago Bulls of the NBA. And so from that, I was able to develop a very fine career, but I had to have a start first. And that's what networking allowed me to do very early on.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? You definitely have to get started if you want to get networking. So what is it about having a networking mindset? What would you recommend?
Boy, it's so interesting because the mindset has so much to do with not expecting something back from someone. When you network with someone effectively, it has to be done from a standpoint of giving, in my opinion. What value can you give to others in the exchange rather than finding out what you can extract from the relationship? And people can sense that a mile away anymore. People have their radars out for people who are just essentially becoming predators in a networking environment. There was a lot of that going on a few years ago as people began switching to virtual environments where people were desperate to find out what their next move would be. And so they joined as many networking groups as they could on Zoom or other platforms. And you saw the vultures coming in, attempting to figure out where the next prey was. And genuine networking that works is done with the heart of service and needs to be approached in that way. If you don't approach networking with a giving heart and an open listening mindset, there's really nothing that can happen that will come to you that's positive. And in fact, it may very well be a negative in your world. So I think that's the most important thing that comes from that, from your question.
Thank you. That's lovely that we've had that sort of theme this week. We've been talking about vampires, people just moving in and seeing what they can get, but also the sort of giving heart and not necessarily expecting something back. So yeah.
Yeah, I love the speakers this week as well. There's been that running theme of giving, which I really love. That if people are listening to this now, I hope they've realised that that's an underlying theme of being in the mindset too of networking. So Bill, how important is it to understand who you are networking with?
Gosh, what a great question, because in certain environments, your antenna and your preparation should choose to be different. If you're going to a casual barbecue in the backyard of someone's home, that's a very different place to go than if you're attending some sort of a hotel at a business after hours event that you're looking to speak with someone from a professional standpoint. Not only does your dress and your approach need to be different, but your preparation needs to be different. And there's a preparation that goes into good, positive networking that is critical to the success of anyone that does this. You have to ask yourself, first of all, what is the end goal that you want from this networking opportunity? What is it you want to achieve in this? Were there any individuals in particular that you really want to seek out to be able to have a conversation with? It isn't just a matter of collecting as many business cards as you can. Those days are kind of over. I think in the era of digital business cards, it becomes more challenging as well, because not everyone has a physical business card any longer. But what we want more than anything else is for our expectations to match what it is that we're doing. If you go into a networking event or a networking opportunity haphazardly, then your results will be haphazard as well. I think that's critical in anything, is to prepare correctly.
Yeah, definitely. Again, that's the theme that's run through these sessions is about planning. But what do you think stops people from networking?
Fear. They're afraid to do something. I was frozen in my tracks. If we go back to my past history, this is the parking lot at the United Center in Chicago, where I was in the parking lot, frozen with fear in 2004, prior to that training event, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, frightened to death, sweat starting to form before I even walked in the building, thinking, oh, will they actually learn anything from me? How could I possibly teach them something they don't already know? And so on and so on. The imposter syndrome that Lee mentioned earlier is really very hard at work in many people's minds. And actually, and as I got over that, of course, we were able to get this, and then several hundred other groups like this that I've been able to train over the course of now the 20-year career that I've had with this. But as I developed the formula for doing this, I saw that people in my classes, like the picture that you see here with the New Orleans or the Charlotte Hornets, they both, if you took two people in the class, both of equal talent, I found that one would perform really, really well. And somehow or other, the other one would drop off or would somehow lose the spark that they needed to succeed. And so I did significant amount of research to find out what the differences were. And what I found were really the culmination of what we now know as the 7 voices in your head and how that all equates. And so what I'd like to do is to share some of those mindset things that I have seen work really well in a mindset that we ought to be using in a networking sense. So if I could share those 7 with you, I'd like to be able to do that with your permission.
Oh,
absolutely.
Our permission is yours. Carry on, Bill.
You bet. Well, the first is comparison. This is the voice that we all hear inside our heads, that when we're driving on the road with someone next to us, when we look at the outfits that they're wearing, when we look at how they look on Facebook compared to everyone else, which is such a challenge for all of us because we all want to put our best face on Facebook, and often it's fake book relative to what everyone is really going on in their lives. And so in a networking perspective, fear of comparison holds people back because they don't want to be compared unfavorably to someone right next to them. Oh, how could I possibly speak to someone who's at this level and I'm not even close to that level? And so the kinds of things I suggest in doing so, in doing this overcoming of this voice that you might have in this fear of comparison, starts with being more interested in others than interesting to others.
Julie's favorite phrase, I think. Yeah, I love it.
Well, I certainly didn't create it, but it's something that I've gotten as a philosophy. And I illustrate it with a terrific story from a businessman named Jay Abraham, who's one of the foremost consultants here in the U.S. at high levels within business, who was traveling to Australia at one point to be able to speak at a conference the next day, and arrived at the hotel late, but his body clock had not changed, and so he wasn't tired. So he went up to the hotel bar at the top of the hotel, and he met an individual at the bar, and he introduced himself as Jay, a gentleman who was going to speak at a conference the next morning. And the gentleman introduced himself as the population control minister of an African nation. And Jay found that fascinating. And so he began asking deeper, wider questions. Are you elected or appointed? Do you have great relationships with all of the different religions within your country? How is it that you go about choosing how many children should be? And what is that? Just on and on. 45 minutes into this Socratic kind of asking, he had this wave of exhaustion come over him from the flight. And he abruptly had to excuse himself just because he had to prepare himself for the next day. And so reluctantly had to say goodnight. And so as they stood up and shook hands, the gentleman said, Jay, this has been such an enjoyable evening. You're one of the most fascinating men I've ever met. Now, what did he know about Jay? All he knew was a businessman from the States who was about to give a conference presentation the next day. What made him fascinating to the minister was his curiosity and the fact that he was far more interested in the minister than being interesting to the minister. And so it's really important that we all approach our networking with that same mindset. The second thing that I have within this voice of comparison that needs to be considered is comparing yourself only to who you were prior to that moment. We all learn things along the way. We become more adept at networking the longer and the more we do it. And so by saying, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be as good at this way, well, you're looking at yourself in the past. If you look at the rearview mirror too long, you know what happens. We're going to crash in front of us because the road ahead of us will eventually catch up to us. Don't look at what you used to do. Don't look at who you used to be. Compare yourself to what you're going to be as you become better and better. Because the harshest critic in the room, the harshest critic is you. So as you move forward in this networking mindset and this voice of comparison that you may have, those are the 3 things I suggest for that. Our second voice is regret. We regret all sorts of things, the if-onlys and coulda, woulda, shouldas of the world. Oh, if I'd have bought that stock sooner, or I wish I wouldn't have bought that awful Halloween costume on eBay and actually worn it, or something like that. So the networking element of regrets can sometimes come into play too. And so overcoming that involves being prepared to find out prior to showing up who is there, what sort of goals you will have for that event, what sort of eye contact do you want to make with others, and a smile. And actually preparing yourself with a smile mindset can go a long way toward the success that you will have and how you will show up to others. To have the courage to move forward, to introduce yourself, or to do the thing that you think is the scariest thing, to be able to succeed at the event. If it's to meet someone in particular that you've been monitoring on social media and you want to be able to meet this person, you've waited so long to do so, to overcome that so that you do not have that pain of regret afterwards. And number 3 is to just reward yourself for even the smallest of successes. Often this pain of regret takes place because we beat ourselves up. But if we lift ourselves up from knowing that we've gotten ourselves even a little bit further along, it goes a long way towards a success mindset going forward. I don't want to interrupt. If you have another question, you're welcome to interrupt, but I'm going to go ahead through the 7 that I have here, because the third one happens to be the imposter syndrome that we had mentioned earlier with Lee, and that is inadequacy. This voice speaks to us in a lot of different ways. And in a networking environment, to overcome this voice of inadequacy is to project that future self that you want to be upon others, that you shouldn't beat yourself up about what you are not. What you want to be is to share with others what you wish to be and are in your mind's eye. Thinking of yourself as a junior executive or someone who perhaps may have less to be able to give that individual they're talking to is the past self. You want to think about yourself in the future and how you might elevate yourself in the minds of the people you're talking to as you're speaking to them, to remove that imposter syndrome, to understand that others, especially now over the last 2 or 3 years, have gone through much of this same thing and are feeling that very same way. And those who rise above have to consider themselves at a different level and have to be able to start right here. And the second thing is to have a great name tag. Now, several of your guests probably have mentioned this, but if people cannot remember your name right away or don't have some sort of mnemonic device to be able to do so, if it's appropriate, because some networking events, it doesn't make sense. If you're going to go to a backyard barbecue, please don't wear a name tag. But if you're going to a professional event, make sure that you have one that is visible and professional. They don't cost all that much. And for the value that they bring, it's really something I recommend everyone has. And then the third thing in overcoming inadequacy in networking is to be mindful of what I call inadequate language. And inadequate language is something that may seem really almost normal for some people to use. It's the language of just and and like and sort of, kind of, hopefully, possibly, maybe at your first convenience whenever you can. For some people, that's a whole sentence. And the challenge for that is you want people to feel as though the time they're spending with you is the most valuable time that they will spend in the entire event. How can you do that? Well, you certainly can't use inadequate language, putting yourself down and somehow making yourself feel less adequate than the person they may have talked to prior or beforehand or even afterwards. So that's what you want to be able to do, to have that inadequacy vanquished a little bit, at least in your mind, as you go into these.
I think it's such a good point, just to jump in there before you move to the next one. That looking at that, what I see with that, Bill, is that first impression makes the lasting impression. Whereas we spoke about all this week, people sell to the room. They have this automatic thing that they need to be selling to the room regularly, consistently, but they don't change their direction. You know, they're forgetting about building up the relationship with somebody. And having that name tag or something that's even the name tag's upside down for some reason, it's a conversation starter. Would you agree that many people do that? They don't look at the first impression to make it lasting.
Absolutely. It's a way in which to grab someone's attention and be able to have something in common right away. I think it's an awesome point, Lee. Thank you for making that.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Carry on.
You bet. Excellent. Well, as we go forward, genetics is maybe an interesting one to explore, because I don't think anyone's gone down this path within this series yet. But I want to talk a little bit about the mindset of someone who may feel as though they were born on the wrong side of the tracks or may not have what it takes to network with the very best of who they want to talk about. And what I have seen through my work is that often some people really don't feel as though their background allows them to succeed. Nobody in my family went to college, so I'm not going to college. Nobody in my family has done this or that, and so I can't possibly have the talent or the ability or the opportunity to be able to do that. I believe genetics sometimes gets in the way of good, positive networking. And so my first piece of advice for that element would be, don't feel as though you have to apologize for who or what you're not. If you're not a world-renowned physicist, if you are not an educator with 35 plus years experience, if you are not someone that has letters behind your name that proves that you went to school to do other things, it doesn't mean you're less valuable in any sort of networking opportunity. I believe it's good advice to take ethical advantage of who you are. And by ethical advantage, I mean it's the kinds of things that are obvious and quantifiable that make you a more interesting person to talk to. What does your family do that's interesting? Where you were raised, perhaps what your parents did for a living, all combine to be the person that you are today. And that's a unique melange of experiences and growing up sorts of education pieces that no one else has. Take advantage of that as you network so that individuals can remember you for the things that are memorable and not to dwell on those things that you believe might be holding others' opinions of you back. So it's a really interesting thing to go forward for. And I hope none of you are suffering from that. But if you are, I hope that that's very helpful. The fifth one is, go ahead, please.
No, please, Karen. Yeah, it's great.
Great. Well, the fifth one is failure. And certainly this is one that rears its head in a lot of different ways. And to overcome the voice of failure in networking, the most important thing to remember is not to put yourself down as you're talking to someone. You might be saying, I screwed up an opportunity like that when you were talking about it, or gee, I wasn't talented enough to be able to do that. Don't put yourself down. So many people do this as a normal course of conversation. It becomes commonplace. If you wish to make a positive impression as a networker, you have to remember to place yourself, not high and mighty, but not to place yourself so low as to kind of tell people that you're somehow self-deprecating in your descriptions of who you are and what experiences you've had and as you contribute to that conversation. And as you're talking to people, be open to learning about what other people have failed in. If they have the opportunity to share that, if indeed they do, take mental notes and encourage others about the lessons that they may have learned from the failure that they may be describing to you, if that's something that is being described to you in the course of the networking event that you're with or that conversation. The fifth one is guilt. This is number 6, actually. We're 6 of 7, the voice of guilt. This is something that as we think about things, we think about, oh boy, it's I should have done this, I should have done that. And, we talk about shoulding over ourselves all the time. And so what we want to be able to do is overcome that prior to it happening. And this is something we can plan for and actually have opportunities to avoid. It's to take every chance you can to politely meet those that you want to meet. What I want to be sure that you don't have happen is that you feel guilty or that you felt like, oh, I should have met that person. I should have had the courage to be able to do that. The voice of guilt gets its energy from inaction. And so what we want to do is take positive action in that networking moment that we have so that we avoid the voice of guilt. And you want to go over the list of goals that you have for each of the events you attend before you start. Even if it's a one-on-one that you're going on Zoom with someone, take note of what you want to accomplish as a result of the time that you're going to spend there so that it's as valuable for you as possible and you don't have the voice of guilt hanging over you after it's done. And the last one that we have in the group of 7 is more difficult to talk about in a networking perspective, but can be extremely real in the hearts of those that I work with, and that's heartbreak. And it could be the loss of a loved one, or a bad breakup, or a loss of a job, something like that. Well, certainly without going into grand detail, there are some ways in which to overcome networking heartbreak, starting with managing the hopes and expectations that you have of that event going in. If you expect to achieve objective X, but you really, it's far more complicated to be able to achieve that, you may want to set your sights for something that may be more in line with what's genuine and real, so that you aren't heartbroken about the results. And to remember that eye contact and smile and genuine positive listening to what someone is saying makes others feel good about themselves and avoid some of the heartbreak that you may suffer if indeed you don't do those kinds of things and come across in the best possible way to the people that you'll be networking with. So there's a lot there. I did not mean to take too long to unpack that, but those are the 7 voices relative to how I think positive networking can take place and help you eliminate those negative voices that might get in the way of your success.
Thank you so much, Bill. I think what you did there with those 7, right, is that you shared a smorgasbord, a treasure trove of hints and tips for anybody who's watching and listening to this now, because we've all been in one of those 7 or many of those 7 or all of those 7 at some time in our business, or most importantly, in our role within the company that we work for. We've all been in there somewhere. So thank you for sharing that. And hopefully everybody who's watching and listening, you've made some copious notes down and made some right things to think. I'm going to try that next week when I go to my next networking event. So thank you very much for sharing those real key bits of advice for us this afternoon. After everything today, is there anything that you would like to promote to everybody or put out there to anybody who's watching and listening to us today, Bill? What would be the thing you'd share?
Well, I think more than anything else, for those who are looking for a message to be delivered to an audience that needs positive motivation, that may be suffering from some of or one or more of the 7 voices, I would love to be able to talk with you about how we can adapt the 7 voices in your head's message to your group and its specific outcomes that you'll be looking to achieve. I've had the pleasure to be MC for many events throughout the world at this point, on MC with the studio that I own and the kinds of multi-camera things that we can provide. And so I would welcome any conversation that someone might have relative to a keynote, a breakout, a workshop, or any sort of MC work that you may have that you would need perhaps the skill of someone of my caliber. So I appreciate the chance to be able to share that with you. And I hope that you took something away from today that was worthwhile for our time spent.
Without a doubt. I think we took a lot. And sorry, Louisa, you next, please.
I was just going to say that I've popped the URL in the chat for anyone who wants to reach out to Bill.
Great.
It's available there.
Thank you. It has been my distinct honor to be on the program. And I think for those that have been a part of this series, I want to congratulate all of you for putting this on. It's a very important and sometimes underappreciated skill, this networking skill. And I hope we were able to bring some clarity to those who are looking to be better at it.
Definitely. And I think that just about wraps it up for today's session. Thank you for everybody that's been watching. Just shout out to Donna Christie from Inch. I hope I pronounced that properly, from Aberdeenshire, for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the session. Thank you so much, Bill, for joining us on Network Now. I wasn't expecting to hear about genetics and heartbreak, so I'll be looking more into that. Such excellent insights and conversation from today's session. Appreciate it so much. Tomorrow we'll be wrapping up the week and going through the lessons learned, so don't miss our conversation following to our fantastic guest speakers, which were Derek Mayer, Stefan Thomas and Bill Guertin.
So make sure you're following us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to YouTube on the Revitalize and Bloom Digital social media platforms. Check out the podcast Network Now on Anchor FM and Spotify for other great conversations.
Can I just say thanks very much, Bill, for sharing your time with us this afternoon. Thank you so much. We look forward to speaking to many people tomorrow afternoon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye for now. See you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.